What's going on, everybody? Off the Mike Sports Network here. Some more reaction here to the college football playoff and the final rankings here. So Notre Dame gets left out. That's the big headline. Alabama gets left in. Notre Dame, ultimately, their head-to-head defeat to Miami the first week of the season ultimately did matter, which is the right thing. But Alabama losing conference title game, ultimately not even moving, was a total crock of shit. And, um, if you're a Notre Dame fan, where you should be directing your anger at is two places: the ACC and ESPN. Kirk Herbstreit, who's one of the voices of college football on ESPN, literally said today, we need to get rid of these weekly ranking shows because they're a total crock of, well, I mean, he didn't say this, but he basically said they're setting them up for failure. So let me give you guys the rankings and how this whole thing shook out. So the first rankings came out a month ago on November 4th. So Notre Dame was ranked 10th in that poll. They were sitting at 10th the whole time, or at least within the top 10 the entire time. You had Texas, Oklahoma, Utah, Virginia, Louisville, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, and Miami. Okay? Miami was at 18 on November 4th. Miami stayed at 18 on November 11th. Notre Dame stayed at 10. Miami moved up to 13 after two straight wins. They moved up to 13 on November 18th. Notre Dame moved up to 9 because that was the week that Alabama lost to Oklahoma. We're going to get that rematch in the next round. Then Notre Dame and Alabama stay at 9-10. Miami moves up to 12 on the 25th. And then the penultimate rankings on the 2nd, 5 days ago, at the time of this recording, Notre Dame and Alabama flip. So after 2 weeks, Notre Dame and Alabama flip, and Miami is at 12. So BYU was the only divider at that point. You had BYU was the only divider between Alabama and Miami. So, listen, the committee, just looking at the way this was, and I think the first rankings, and I think they might have pointed this out, the first rankings came after Miami lost to SMU. And I think some people in that room were sheepishly thinking, hey, Miami might lose another game. They still got to go to Pitt at the end of the season. I think they still had to play NC State, and NC State was an interesting team who had already beaten Georgia Tech. And they were like, yeah, they're probably not going to play for the ACC title. But the weekly rankings totally set up Notre Dame to fail. Because if it ever got to the point we saw the gradual move and just the arbitrary rankings and, just throwing teams wherever they want to and, laying it out over time and just seeing it, it's just really inconsistent. Their explanations weren't very consistent. They were talking about Miami being in the separate pod and all this other stuff. The weekly ranking shows and, the weekly, interviews with Hunter Yurachek or Mac Rhodes, they were just a bunch of nonsense. It's just television. And I understand they need to put programming and they need inventory, but there are better ways to use your television time than to just make up a bunch of nonsense on effectively a reality television show only for Notre Dame to be in the 9 or 10 spot the entire time, and yet they're 11th at the end of this thing. Like, I get the whole thing reality-wise. Miami should have been ahead of Notre Dame the entire time. But the recency of losses and a lot of things screwed this whole thing up. And that's where I think you don't need to rank these schools in your own CFP poll and give us all this speculation and plant all these ideas in our heads to the point where a lot of people thought it was a foregone conclusion Notre Dame was going to make the playoff. And yet here we are on the last day, they get thrown out the door. Doesn't make any sense. I get the Miami part of this. Them against Miami was always going to come down to head-to-head, and Miami won out. Good on them for doing that. That's about all I'm giving them credit for. Because the fact that they put Alabama into this thing, talked about resume and all this other stuff, they had Alabama ranked behind Notre Dame as far back as like 2 weeks ago and then flipped them conveniently when nothing changed. That's my problem. And the ESPN ranking shows really showed the deep flaws in this system of what they're doing. So you should blame ESPN. And here's my other conspiracy theory. I think ESPN wanted to try and prop up the SEC and the ACC because they have partnerships with them. They don't have a partnership with Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got a television contract with the NBC. I mean, Notre Dame games occasionally get on ESPN, and they do have a good brand, but they're partnered up with the ACC and the SEC, so they were going to side on that. There was a couple of convenient excuses there. One played in a conference championship game, lost, but still played in a conference title game, and then Miami beat Notre Dame head-to-head. There's a conspiracy theory for you guys right there. And then the ACC. If you're a Notre Dame fan, you should be livid at the ACC. Because here's the thing. If Miami was playing for the ACC title game, and they should have been, because there was, a 4 or 5-way tie, because a bunch of teams didn't play each other, and they had to go to a bunch of different tiebreakers to sort out the top of the ACC. And Duke ended up getting the spot with Virginia. And Duke beat Virginia, and Duke is a 5-loss team, so they weren't going to win. They weren't going to be in the playoff, despite having a really talented team. If the ACC would have had some foresight and changed their tiebreaker rules to, hey, let's put our best teams in the conference title game, and let's go by the rankings of the CFP, even though, like I said, or let's go by the rankings of the AP poll, or hell, do it like the Mountain West and go to the fucking computers. They decided by a freaking computer who was going to be playing for their conference title game, and have your best teams in the conference title game. Because if Miami was playing Virginia, one of two things would have happened. Miami would have won, and they would have gotten into the playoff, and Notre Dame would be in as well. Or Virginia would have won, Miami would have been out and would have been a 3-loss team, and Notre Dame would have been in there too. The ACC would have gotten their team in, they would have gotten their champion in, and none of this nonsensical stuff would have happened. And James Madison, we wouldn't have the ridiculous concept of James Madison going to Oregon as a 12 seed in a college football playoff with the 12 best teams. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, be mad at ESPN. Be mad at the system of this playoff. Be mad at realignment. Be mad at ESPN. Be mad at the ACC. All those other people, because that's why you got fucked here. Also, also another conspiracy theory. There were SEC officials reffing the Texas A&M Notre Dame game, and they missed the holding call on that pivotal touchdown that won Texas A&M the game by 1 point in South Bend, 41-40. That's one of the other reasons why Notre Dame is out of this playoff. But it's ridiculous that they're left out. So if you guys are mad on the campus of Notre Dame in South Bend, I don't blame you, because you have every right to be upset. It's embarrassing for the sport that one of the best teams in college football and a team that a lot of people thought could win the national title gets shut out for a badly performing Alabama team and James Madison. Again, it comes down to ESPN's stupid-ass ranking show and the ACC's stupid-ass tiebreakers that ultimately kept Notre Dame out of this thing. So those are my thoughts on that. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.